All right, we will just let people trickle in now. And you'll see I just turned on the live captioning. So it has been working pretty well. The AI is not terrible, but if it will need some cleaning up. So I'll fix the captions before we post the talk. Right, and I think people might take a minute to come in because this is the first one that's actually started on time, so they may be surprised. Let's see, I'm just gonna check and make sure everything is streaming okay to the lobby. All right, we've got folks coming in. Good morning, good evening, everybody. Where is everybody tuning in from? I see some familiar names. Good morning, Lorna. Good morning, Vasiliki. We'll give it just one more minute for folks to join us. Good morning. And if you want to tell us in the chat where you're joining us from, it would be great to know. Clarksville, Tennessee, good morning. All right, we will give it just another minute to make sure everybody can get in okay. Juneau, Alaska, Nova Scotia, New York City. Hello, everyone. Oh my gosh, it must be quite early in Juneau. All righty. Hello, Rachel. I see you just joined. Ah, Chilliwack, hello. Great. All right, I think we can get started shortly. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this third day of the Festival of Indigenous Languages. We're so happy to see you. We've had 2 great days of talks so far, and we're really looking forward to a third day of great talks. So the usual technical stuff applies. We will have live captioning for this talk. Be aware that this talk is being recorded. And so if you ask a question during the Q&A session, we might read your name out loud or it might appear in the captions. So just be aware. And if you have any thoughts or experiences of your own to share, please do. This isn't just for formal questions. We'd love to hear from you about any responses or any similar experiences you've had to what Dr. Pasanen talks about. Please tune in, chime in. This is an informal gathering for everybody to share. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker of the day. Dr. Annika Pasanen is working as a professor of Sami sociolinguistics at the Sami University of Applied Sciences. She has a PhD in Finno-Ugric studies, and the topic of her dissertation was revitalization of the Inari Sami language. Her interests cover language endangerment, language politics, multilingualism, and especially language revitalization. She has both researched and participated in revitalization activities among several Indigenous and minority peoples, especially in Sapmi and the Arctic regions of the Russian Federation. She is Finnish, originally from central Finland. She lives in Inari and speaks Inari and North Sami languages. Thank you so much, Annika, for being with us today.
Thank you. I cannot say it's so nice to see you because I don't actually see anyone in addition to Anna and Amanda and myself, but I can feel you, and it's so wonderful to feel you. And I hope I will also see some of you. So I want to give my greetings from the Sami land, Sapmi, land of the Sami people, where I'm living. I'm sitting at home in Inari, in the village of Riutula, which is 10 kilometers from the village of Inari. And Inari is one of the central villages of the Sami people, and some how the central of Sami culture in Finland, I might say. I'm very happy to get this opportunity to tell you about my background, my experiences, my thoughts concerning my favorite issues, language revitalization. And I will now share my screen. And I have to mention that there is quite a snowstorm going on here in Inari. So I really hope my internet connection will work today. Let's pray for that. And if I'm disappearing, I'll just try to come back as soon as possible. Okay, so here you see my screen and my PowerPoint, which is nowadays quite an essential tool of thinking and presenting things. Sometimes I'm afraid that I'm not able to say anything or tell anything without a PowerPoint. That's a little bit scary. Here you can see a photograph where I'm standing with an Enets elder, Enets language master. Enets is a language spoken in the district of Taimur in the Russian Federation in the region of Krasnoyarsk. And I will tell you something about that language, which is quite an interesting case, as all the languages, of course. And in addition to me and the Enets elder, there is her granddaughter in the picture. Let me first introduce you some of the important languages of my life. My mother tongue is Finnish. I come from central Finland. I come from a really monolingual Finnish-speaking area. Later, when I had moved away from my home village, I understood that there have been all the time, for instance, speakers of Karelian language living in the same area. But that was something that I never knew as a child. But already in my early ages, or after the high school, I moved to Inari, where I'm now living. And it happened that North Sami and Inari Sami languages became also very close and important languages for me, even if I don't have any ethnic connection to them. I have absolutely no Sami roots or Sami blood. I studied Uralic languages, which means this Uralic language family consists of Finno-Ugric languages and Samoyedic languages, and I have a degree of PhD in Finno-Ugric languages and cultures, and I was studying mostly at the University of Helsinki. Karelian is a really important language for me. Karelian is a closely related language to Finnish, and I have been working in a language nest project in the Republic of Karelia, which is located in the Russian Federation. I have been also doing some research among the Karelians, and I have participated in their attempts for revitalization of Karelian language, both in the Russian side and also in Finland, where the speakers of this language also live. Then there is also a Finno-Ugric language, Mari language, or more precisely Meadow-Mari. And that's a language that was really important for me for 1 year. It was the year 2001 and 2002 when I was living in the Republic of Mari-El, working there teaching Finnish language and culture at the University of Yoshkar-Ola. And I was basically living in that language because all my friends and networks were Mari speaking. Inari Sami language has many meanings for me. I have been working in that language in several projects. I have been doing research. I have participated various activities in the fields of language activism. Inari Sami is also very important for me socially. I have friends who speak that language, and Inari Sami is also the second mother tongue of my children, who have been lucky enough to get immersed in the language nest since the early childhood in Inari Sami language. I speak also North Sami. I have been studying it to some extent at university. It is also a social language of social networks for me, and nowadays it is the main language in my work. I have been working for 1 year at Sami Allaskoula, or Sami University of Applied Sciences. And here you can see some pictures from that institute. So Sami University of Applied Sciences, it is the only Sami-speaking academic institution in the world, basically. It is a member of U-Arctic network, and it has this official status of Indigenous university. There are disciplines from Sami language and literature to Sami handicraft and Sami reindeer herdery, and we educate teachers and preschool teachers. So it is really important, really essential academic institution for the whole Sami society. And for 1 year, I have been now working as a professor of Sami social linguistics, and I really feel being in the right place, and that's big joy. Sami Allaskoula is located in Norway. If we are speaking about state borders and states, it is in Norway, in the village of Kautokeino. So it is about 250 kilometers from my home, and I'm like commuting between Kautokeino and Anar, Inari. Then some important domains or fields or methods of language revitalization, which have become important for me, for my research and for my life. At first, I would mention language nests, and you can see some translations or translations of the concept language nest in Finnish, in Karelian, in Inari Sami, North Sami, and Skolt Sami. So these 3 Sami languages, Inari, North, and Skolt Sami, are the languages which are spoken in the Finnish side of the Sami land. And language nest activities, it is something that I have been working in many areas. And it is, as I already mentioned, my own children have been going to the language nest, and after that to Inari Sami medium basic education. And it has been one of the key topics of my dissertation. Okay, now I can see that my internet connection is unstable, but I hope that you are still hearing me. Then another very important method or field of language revitalization for me is a kind of intensive 1 year lasting language education for adult population. It is also something very important for the Sami languages and Sami culture in Finland, because we have here in Inari, we have this wonderful education institute called Sami Education Institute, which is offering this kind of 1 year lasting intensive education in Inari Sami, in Scout Sami, and in North Sami languages. And you can just imagine how important this kind of education has been and still is and is going to be to Sami languages, which have been lacking like generations. Generations have been left without their own language, and now they have this wonderful opportunity to take the language back via this kind of intensive language studies. And one of the most important parts of this intensive language education is, of course, master apprentice language learning, which has been included in these studies since the year 2009. And that was when I was working in the education project of Inari Sami language. It was the first intensive education, 2009 and 10, and we wanted to include something. We wanted to include the elders to this education somehow, and then we happened to find out that this master apprentice language learning method has been applied in various circumstances and in different regions of the world, and we decided to have this method used also in our education, and it has been used ever since. And of course, nowadays, a kind of Sami academia, I mean university studies and academic publishing and academic life in general, where Sami language is the main tool, main medium of communication and work. It is, of course, very important for me nowadays. And among the Sami, we are really having this wonderful situation that Sami languages are developing as academic languages. I have been working mostly among the Sami people and mostly among the Sami people of Nordic countries. And on the other hand, in different territories of the Russian Federation. And these areas, Nordic countries and Russian Federation, they are really different areas in terms of language revitalization, language politics, and circumstances and grassroots life of indigenous and minoritized languages. I think you may say that Nordic countries are one of the most favorable, politically, one of the most favorable countries of the world when it comes to revitalization opportunities. So, of course, all the Nordic countries are having this load of assimilation, historical load of assimilation politics and colonialism. But nowadays, they are running quite active politics pro indigenous and minority languages. Of course, it is mostly concerning the Sami, who are having this status of official indigenous people in Nordic countries. Or actually only in Norway and Finland, because in Sweden they are not mentioned as an indigenous group, but as a minority group. But in Finland and Norway, Sami people are having official status of an indigenous people. So, of course, we are having quite favorable legislation, and all the Nordic countries have been committed to several international conventions, which are aimed to maintain and develop, for instance, indigenous and minority languages. Sami people are in all three Nordic countries, I mean, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, they are having their own Sami parliaments. So they are a kind of officially a part of how would I say that? They have this official political status, and states are negotiating with them, and they have somewhat political power, mostly locally and mostly in when it comes to culture and language. And there's a lot to do to strengthen the status of the Sami when it comes to land rights, for instance. And there are a lot of problems and conflicts going on. But I would say that when it comes to language and culture, Sami people are having quite good opportunities to develop their languages and culture. And of course, Sami people are having really active civil society. We have a lot of associations and active people and community-based activities. We have state-funded mother tongue medium preschool and basic education in Sami languages in Norway, in Sweden, and in Finland. And we have, for instance, state-funded daily media in several Sami languages. Then again, when looking at the language and national politics of the Russian Federation, it looks really different. Assimilation politics is still going on in Russia. Language shift is taking place in most areas. Theoretically, there is quite a favorable legislation in many areas, and there are international conventions that Russian Federation is participating. But in practice, the situation is that, for instance, when it comes to educational settings, Russian is practically the only language having official status of official language of education everywhere. There are some exceptions, for instance, Tatar language, but for instance, in all the areas of Uralic or Finno-Ugric and Samoyedic speech communities, Russian is the only official language used in school. Of course, there's a lot going on. There are active people and there are active communities and various activities at local level. But the official support is mainly targeted for a kind of symbolic use of the language. And there are no, for instance, circumstances where children can acquire their own language outside their family. Okay, then something more about Inari Sami language. There is this map. You can see the speech area of Inari Sami language in the yellow zone or the number 6 in the map. So really, Inari Sami is not the only Sami language. It is one of the 10 Sami languages. And as you can see, Sami languages are spoken in a very wide area in Nordic countries and in the Russian Federation in the Kola Peninsula. And these languages are really and officially considered separate languages. They are not dialects. The mutual understanding between these languages is not a simple question, but one may say that usually the neighboring Sami, the speakers of neighboring Sami languages can usually understand each other to some extent. And of course, there are things that all the speakers may understand from each other. But in general, the further you go geographically, the less you understand. Inari Sami language has always been spoken in the same area. It is the current municipality of Inari or Anar. Anar is the Sami variant. And the number of speakers has also been almost the same. Of course, we don't know about we don't know about the historical situation so well, but one may say that it has always been a speech community with less than 1,000 speakers. Inari Sami language became endangered gradually, as is the usual case, and that happened more concretely after the Second World War. So Inari Sami children who were born in 1940s, they usually learned Inari Sami language at home, but the Inari Sami children born in 1960s usually already didn't acquire the language at home. And then there were some decades, a couple of decades, when the language was used less and less, and it became more and more endangered. But something very unexpected happened in 1986. An association or organization called Anaraskiela Servi, Association of Inari Sami Language, was founded. And this organization started activities like publishing a journal, publishing literature. They started to activate the community. They started some kind of language courses. And more concretely and more effectively, language revitalization began in 1997 when Language Nest activities started. And after that, there was mother tongue medium basic education started a couple of years after the Language Nest activities. Then after that, intensive language studies for adults were started, and a lot of different things started. So one may say that Language Nest was this power, was this important factor that actually made people work and made people take back their language. Nowadays, Inari Sami language has a very strong position in many essential fields. I think when we compare languages of a few hundred speakers, because this language is spoken by maybe 450 speakers, I think it is the only case in the world where we are having the whole basic education, we are having a whole preschool system, university studies, daily media, developing literature for youngsters, and so many other things. And of course, one of the most important things is that there is this reversing language shift taking place in families. So here you see my academic dissertation, which title is Guausuu ja Päivit Suova, Sarastus ja päivän valo, Inarin saamen kielen revitalisaatio. It is like dawn and the daylight, revitalization of the Inari Sami language. It is written in Finnish for the reason that it is my mother tongue, and it is also the language that all the Inari Sami people can read. And of course, it was very important to me that they can read my dissertation. In the other photograph, this picture has been taken at the day of my defense, and there are some key people, key persons of Inari Sami revitalization movement in the picture. There is this man, Matti Morottaja, or Kuopchasammal Matti in his Sami name, giving me some present. And he is really an important person in the whole movement of Inari Sami revitalization. And it is an quotation of his editorial text of the journal Annikas, which he wrote in 1992, where I took the title of my dissertation, Dawn and Daylight. It was the time when Sami languages had the first language law in Finland. And in general, in the beginning of 1990s, there was a kind of hope that Sami languages will be developed, and they, like he is writing here, Sami languages were seeing as a kind of dawn. And I would like to read this quotation in Inari Sami, and you can read the translation yourselves. Tehalumos liikuitto et ulmu särnutsi sämikiela. Tom laaha I pöyti meritid totli ulmu jeijas haltust. Anaraskiela uäinää jo kuoksuu seungis äiki manga. Mi sämmili jeja ennuu meritep itäu peivichuova. So I think these words are very significant for and they are somehow defining quite a lot when it comes to the future of the language. Then something totally different about Karelian language. I wanted to introduce more precisely these two languages because they are the languages I have been working in the early years of my career as a language researcher. So Karelian language is a Finnic language. It's also a member of Uralic language family, and it is closely related to Finnish and other Finnic languages like Estonian. And it is spoken in the Russian Federation, in the Republic of Karelia and some other regions, and also in Finland. And in Finland, it is a kind of non-territorial language, which is due to the fact that Karelian was spoken originally in areas that after the Second World War became a part of Russia. So the speakers of Karelian language were settled in different parts of our new area of Finland. Karelian language has a few tens of thousands of speakers, and it is definitely in danger or seriously endangered depending on the region. There has been quite an active revitalization movement going on. In the Russian side, it started in the beginning of 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed. And in the Finnish side, a little bit later, I would say like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. But unfortunately, Karelian language doesn't have such a status as, for instance, Sami languages in Finland. So you can see that legislation and political status has a lot to do. It has a huge meaning for the possibilities of revitalization. Sami languages in Finland are having these possibilities because they have a really strong position politically in Finland, but speakers of Karelian do not have such a position, and their attempts for revitalization haven't been as successful as the activities of the Sami people. And they are having just the same needs. They would need language nests, they would need mother tongue medium education and so on. But by now it hasn't been possible. So this intergenerational language transmission, it hasn't been really restarted. It is only in some individual cases, but not at a wider scale. And in the Russian Federation, there is a lot going on, but not such methods used that could lead to restart of the intergenerational language transmission. Here are some photographs from the beginning of this millennium. It is maybe the year 2000 or 2001. And this is from the first Karelian speaking language nest, which was located in the village of Uhtua or Kalevala. It is in northern parts of the Republic of Karelia. And I was working in this languageness project, where the aim was to revitalize Karelian language in the village. And because I had already been living in Inari and I had seen the success of language nest activities in the case of Inari Sami, I suggested that same kind of activities would be started in Kalevala, and that actually happened. There were people who considered this possible and necessary, and there was this Karelian language nest working for a couple of years. But unfortunately, for political reasons, and when the political atmosphere was changing in the whole Russian Federation, these activities were no more possible. Then something about my position as a kind of outsider insider in of course in many communities, but I'm now mostly thinking about Sami society. So as I have mentioned, I am ethnically totally outsider among the Sami. I'm not a Sami, I'm a Finn. And that's something that I have been always very aware of. And always when I'm, for instance, lecturing or giving speeches or doing whatever, I want to define my position. I don't want anyone to consider me Sami or to consider me like pretending to be Sami or anything like that. I think it is very essential that a kind of key power and key ideologies and key methods of revitalization are in the hands of the ethnic members of the community. There is no point that it would be me somehow defining how Inari Sami people should revitalize their language or whatever. But on the other hand, I think I have nothing to apologize. I think I have a right to do what I am doing. But of course, that's something that I have to reconsider and rethink and somehow evaluate all the time. It's not something that I can just decide for the rest of my life. Sometimes there is this critiques going on, for instance, in the Sami society nowadays. There are really a lot of Finnish people learning Sami languages nowadays, because Sami languages have become kind of prestigious languages at local level. It is really advantageous to know Sami language. You have a lot better opportunities, for instance, in labor markets when you know one of the Sami languages or more. So and there is this generally positive atmosphere and a kind of ideological wish of the many Finnish people to somehow support the Sami community. So for these reasons, there are a lot of Finnish people learning Sami languages nowadays. And that has led to a situation that there are also a lot of Finnish people, for instance, working in language nests, in schools, in the fields of language planning. And sometimes there is this critiques going on. Are these Finnish speakers of Sami languages taking up space from the ethnic members of the community? And I think it is a question that has to be discussed, absolutely. But there is also a kind of mathematic background. You know, we are talking about really small communities, and during the revitalization, the needs for professionals to be working in Sami languages has grown very much. So I don't know whether it is ever realistic that all these needs could be fulfilled by the ethnic members of community. Because if there are 400 speakers of Inari Sami language, maybe 250 of them are of Inari Sami origin. That's something that I'm just trying to somehow approximately guess. Are these 250 people enough for to be working in all the professions we are needing nowadays? I don't think so. So if we are thinking about really small communities, it may be that in some individual case that a Finnish speaker of the Sami language has, for instance, been hired to a working place that could be given to an Inari Sami person. But I think much more there are cases that there are these new places that are being created, and there are not enough Inari Sami people to be working in all of them. So it is not a simple question. Of course, it is always also an important question: who can represent people, who can speak for the people? I think it would be, in many cases, I would wish that there would be a Sami person giving lectures and giving speeches and telling about the revitalization of Inari Sami language. But there is no other person who has been researching these issues. It is me. So I think as long as the situation is like this, it has to be me who is speaking. And all I can do is to clarify my position and try to somehow always emphasize that I am speaking for myself and I am emphasizing things that I see important. Some other people would maybe telling about some other issues. Of course, when we are talking about revitalization of endangered languages, stigmatized languages, there is this emotional load always in the picture. And in many cases, I have experienced that it may be easier for me to consider some issues because they are not so personal for me. And that is not only a good thing, because it also makes me unable to see the whole picture. I am not feeling the same feelings. I am not feeling the same emotional load as maybe in the case of an ethnic Sami person. So there are some pluses and there are some minuses. And when I am revitalizing Sami language, it is not a question of life or death of my own people. Of course, it is in my heart too, but it's not such a question of life and death as to the ethnic members of the community. And I recognize that there is a lot, and there will maybe always be a lot that I don't understand, because I don't have that load. I don't have this history. Even if I've been interviewing people and talking with people, it's not in my history. It's not the pain of my people. And that's just something that I have to understand and live with. Then I would like to tell you something about nice moments, memorable moments during my career. There you may see three red stars. Here we have Inari. Then there is this in the middle. There is the region of Taimur or Taimur district and the Enets language, for instance, spoken there. And then there is this island of Sahalin, where Nivhi, for instance, Nivhi people are living. And I was telling about Inari Sami language, and there is one photograph that brings very nice memories for me. This is a photograph taken in the day of the closing party or ceremony of the first intensive studies of Inari Sami language. That was organized in 2009 and 10 by the University of Oulu, Association of the Inari Sami Language, and the Sami Educational Institute of Inari. So this is the project I was working in, and it was the first intensive education. After that, we have been there have been almost every year somewhat similar education going on. So as a result of this first education, we got 17 new speakers to Inari Sami language, and they were having different professions. They were already adult people with degrees and working places. There was a priest, there was a journalist, there were teachers, and that specific day was a real day of joy for the students, for the project workers, for the language masters. There are also language masters in this photograph. And it was a great day for the whole Inari Sami community, because 17 new speakers, it's not a small thing. Then about Enets language. As I mentioned, it is spoken in the district of Taimur. It is an Uralic language, and it is a very small language with a few dozen speakers. In the village of Potapovo, which is located along the river Yenisei, there are approximately 200 inhabitants, and most of the speakers of Enets language are living in that very village. In 2012, there was quite an amazing development in the village when kindergarten group with partial immersion in Enets language was founded. And that was as a result of collaboration of Taimur College and the local administration and myself. I was visiting that village in 2011 and telling about Language Nest activities, and we were trying to find out whether there are possibilities to start that work. And it was started, and they call it Language Nest, and I could call it also Language Nest, even if it's not 100% language immersion as Language Nest should be. That Language Nest was working. It had really positive effect at local level. And in 2014, I was revisiting this village, and I got an opportunity to go to the Language Nest and see the children and listen to them. And it was a miracle, because anyone could hear that these children really had acquired Enets language of a few dozen speakers. And that was another day of joy for me, because I think it had been quite many decades ago when a whole group of children was playing and singing and talking in Enets language. Unfortunately, this is one of the attempts that didn't have or haven't had long-term perspectives, because for many practical reasons, this group is not working anymore like it used to work. There is still something going on, but they are not having this separate specific group of Language Nest. Then these pictures are from Sakhalin, island of Sakhalin, and the northern part of it, the village called Nekrasovka. And there is something very, very important and exciting going on. There are local people here planning how to implement, how to start master apprentice program in the NIV language. This is an isolated language spoken by maybe 100 or maybe 200 speakers in the region of Amur and northern Sakhalin. And that time, a revitalization project had been started as a collaboration of the local people and the University of Helsinki. And that's why I was already also attending this project as a researcher of the university. So these local people decided to start their own variant of master apprentice activities, a kind of family groups or intergenerational master apprentice groups. They had 1 or 2 elders, speakers of NIV language, and mostly their own children or grandchildren in the same group. And in the Rootless handbook of language revitalization, there is a nice overview on this whole revitalization project of NIV language, which I can just recommend you. Okay, what have I learned during the decades working with language revitalization? I have learned that balance of goals of the community, what people want to do, what kind of language situation the people are wishing to have, and the methods people are choosing. Goals and methods are usually not balanced. In all communities where I have been working, I have seen that people are having too high hopes in too meager methods. People are hoping that 1 hour or 2 hours language instruction will save their language. And there is nothing wrong in that if that's really enough for people. It is okay if people are happy with 1 or 2 hours a week in their own language. But if people really are wishing to have children actively producing the language via this kind of methods, it is sad, and it is really common situation. I have learned and understood that multilingualism is really often understood wrong, not correctly. Really often, for instance, authorities or members of majority are understanding that if we want to get multilingual, bilingual children, it means that all the spaces have to be bilingual. They may be, for instance, argumenting against a language nest because that should be a monolingual space in the indigenous or minority language. They may be arguing that, okay, these spaces need to be bilingual. You have to speak both Sami and Finnish because you are wanting to have bilingual children, right? So majority, and of course also members of indigenous and minority communities, have to understand that when it is about very endangered languages with very little input in the life of children, it is really important to create as monolingual spaces for language acquisition as possible. Then more about majority. It is really common phenomenon in the life of minority communities that people don't dare to speak their own language if there is even 1 member of majority who doesn't understand. Because people want to be polite, and people have been scared to be polite. They have been told that it is not nice to speak minority language if not everybody understands. So it is really important to somehow educate the members of majority to tolerate the situation that they do not understand what is spoken. Or then the members of majority have to be included. The minority language has to be made available for them. But that's a decision that only the community can make. And it's not my decision, for instance. But in the case of Inari Sami community, it has been a clear decision made already in the early years of the revitalization, that they have decided to make Inari Sami language available for also for the majority. There is this very common recommendation of this official ideology of bilingualism, that parents should always speak their mother tongue with their children. But I have understood and seen, of course, for instance, among the Sami, that it's not always a good recommendation, because there are really a lot of Sami parents who didn't acquire Sami language in their childhood. And now when they want to reverse the language shift, the most effective way is to speak Sami to their own children, even if it's not their first language. And that is something that, for instance, authorities or maybe nurses or doctors or teachers don't always understand. They may be considering this choice harmful. They may be asking whether it is good for the child or whether it's harming the relationship between parents and children, because parents are speaking not their first language. So we should be widening the understanding of the need of language revitalization, for instance, among these professionals who are giving recommendations to young parents. I have learned that revitalization has to be made realistic for average people, ordinary people, so-called ordinary people. We are all ordinary and unordinary. But you know, very often revitalization is a kind of issue of teachers or researchers or a kind of exceptional people with exceptional resources. And you have to be really, really determined, and you have to do some research to be able to transmit the language to your children and so on. It's really important that the average people with no education, higher education, or with no specific knowledge on language transmission and so on, that these average people could be attending and could be, for instance, transmitting their language to their children. And finally, I have learned that among the Inari Sami people, that only a language that is allowed to be spoken incorrectly can revive. And only a language learner who feels accepted with the developing language skills can learn better. So tolerance is a kind of key factor of the success in the revitalization of Inari Sami language. And that has been wonderful phenomenon to see and research and live in. So I see I have used the whole hour that was given to this session, but I'm not in a hurry. So if you just have questions or comments, I'm really happy to talk with you. And here you can see the word thank you in 8 of the 10 Sami languages. Kiitos, takka. And here you see my email address. I'll be happy to communicate with anyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika. That was a wonderful talk and really thought-provoking for anyone who is in that insider-outsider role. And really wonderful to learn more about the incredible work being done in the Sami languages. I think we have one question already. Anybody else with questions, please drop it in the Q&A. We have a question from Paya Sakumbu. It says, thank you, Annika, for presenting this beautiful Sami situation, quite unique with government support. Concerning your dissertation, did you have the choice of language to use in writing, or did your university have a policy on that?
Yeah, in Finland, dissertations are nowadays written quite a lot in English, but it depends on the discipline. And in our field, Finno-Ugric language studies, it is still quite usual and quite common to write in Finnish. Of course, I had to be considering between Finnish and Sami language, but actually, if I would have chosen Inari Sami, there wouldn't have been academic actors for the defense, you know, because you have to have an opponent and you have to have these other people reading and commenting you. There wouldn't have been enough people able to do that in Inari Sami language. So that was out of the question from the beginning. And I didn't want to even consider writing it in English, because that would have made it impossible to read for many Inari Sami people and people I have been interviewing and so on. So it was quite obvious for me to do it in Finnish, and that was, as I said, it is quite a usual choice in our field of university studies.
Thank you. We have another question from Claudio. He says, what do you recommend to go from an outsider to an insider role?
Could you read it once again? I'm not seeing these questions. Are they in the chat, or where do you see them?
They're in the Q&A. So the question in its entirety is, what do you recommend to go from an outsider to an insider role?
I'm not sure whether I understand the point of the question.
Yeah, Claudia, if you want to add any additional details to that question.
Yeah.
I'm sort of interpreting it as, do you think that line between, oh, okay, there we go. He says, I mean, as an outsider, how do you place yourself within the community?
Yeah, it's not simple. And of course, it depends a lot of many factors. It depends on your personality, it depends on your history and a relationship between your own group and the group that you are doing research or living in. I can just say that in the case of us being in the case of a Finnish person living in Inari Sami community, I think it has been quite natural and not so emotionally difficult process, because of this tolerance and acceptance and ideological choice made by people themselves, that they have wanted to wish welcome also outsiders. But in many other cases, I think it wouldn't have been so easy. And there are differences between different Sami groups even. So for instance, speakers of North Sami language, which are much more, and they are a wider group living in Finland, Sweden and Norway. They may not be they may not be sharing all the same ideological lines, and it may be more difficult to settle in and to make one space in that community than in the Inari Sami community. But of course, it depends on also like your personal aims and your whole personality. It is really a complicated question. But I think you just have to be open, and you shouldn't expect too much. If you are moving to a place, it is natural that not everybody is wishing you immediately welcome. You just have to try to find your place and to be open and to be aware of your position. You cannot go anywhere and like start to dictate that, okay, now we are doing this and that, and you have to listen to people and let them get to know you. And of course you have to give also something. You cannot just, for instance, interview people and go and make and collect materials and so on. You have to be opening yourself as well, as you see I'm doing right now.
Thank you, Annika. We have another question about this insider-outsider relationship from Jeremy Paul. He says, how have you observed non-Sami people accept the responsibility to learn Sami languages? In our community, non-Tsimshian people lose their minds if we so much as suggest to change a public sign to be in our language or change the name of a school to be in our language. How can we overcome this friction that occurs and the resistance of people to accept our language appearing in public spaces? It's a great question.
Yes, and it is a really wide question and a wide and long process. It is not something that can happen just like that. And of course, as I tried to tell, it has a lot to do with the political status of the Sami people in, for instance, in Finland. The fact that Sami people are having this quite a strong political status as an indigenous people, and for instance, the fact that Finland is officially bilingual state because we are having Finnish and Swedish as national languages already. So there is, of course, a kind of the same kind of reactions against Sami languages and Sami rights in general, also in Finland. And for instance, these public signs, they are something so sensitive and so with such an emotional load in some areas. It really in the Norwegian side, for some reason, these public signs are really often like destroyed and protested, and it is something very hard to understand how such a meager sign of another language can make people so mad. But for some reason, I think in Finland it may be because we, as I mentioned, we are having two official languages. So Finnish people and Finnish majority is used to see two languages in everywhere. So it may be not driving people so mad if they see also Sami languages in addition, maybe. But of course, the whole question about members of majority wanting or wishing to learn minority language, in our case, it has a lot to do with the fact that Sami languages do have kind of prestige. If you know Sami language, you have much better options, for instance, getting a good job in Inari compared to the situation that you know only Finnish. So, and that's of course a result of a real hard work and long historical processes. So I don't know. It depends on the case and the situation and the history.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Jeremy. We have a question in Spanish from Victoria Cruz. I'm going to translate that into English. She says, what do you think about creating materials for revitalization, for example, stories?
Yes, of course, all kind of materials are useful, and I think of course the best option is to begin from what people already have, and stories is something that people are having all around the world, and storytelling is also something very important for Sami people. And in our Sami University of Applied Sciences, storytelling is one of the main methods used in the teacher education, for instance. So there is this general goal to not just to take the educational models of Western world or majority society and translate them into Sami language, but instead to take what people already have and make that usable and possible in educational settings.
Thank you. We have some more room for questions if anyone has any, but actually I have a question for you. I'm curious how language nests came to Inari in the first place.
Yes, it's a really interesting history that happened in the beginning of 1990s. There was, I don't know, because that was the time when I wasn't yet living in Inari, but I have heard that there was a kind of seminar concerning Sami languages and Sami rights organized in Inari, and there was a well-known social linguistic and language activist, grand old lady Tuve Skutnapkangas, coming to Inari and giving a presentation in that seminar, and she was mentioning Kohangareo movement of the Maori, Aotearoa, and Matti Morottaja, Kopchasaamal Matti, who was in one of my photographs, who is this main initiator of the Inari Sami revitalization movement, was attending this what we need in Inari too. And they started to work for that purpose. And after a couple of years, Inari Sami activists managed to get funding and were able to start Language Nest group in the village of Inari. So it was basically from Aotearoa to Anar via Tuve Skutnapkangas. And I think it tells something about the importance of sharing best knowledges and possibilities of an individual researcher to have a huge impact. Of course, nowadays it would have been much easier. One could just read online from the experiences of the Maori, but in the beginning of 1990s, it wasn't so simple.
Thank you. That's really wonderful to hear that it came from international collaborations so directly. And
Yes.
It's great how much more possible that is these days. We have one more question from Andy Niederecker. She says, thank you for your talk, Annika. It was great to hear your experiences and perspectives. I was interested in asking you about what role do you think academia and universities have in language work? Is there more that can be done between the two? Do you have suggestions on how to make research more relevant and accessible to communities and their work?
Yes, in general, of course, I think academia may have a huge role and should have a huge role in language work. and it also should have a lot to do with the local level. And I think in many cases the research should be planned with the local community and should be maybe more planned or designed to fulfill the needs of the local level. And of course, there may be a lot of discussion concerning academic freedom and researchers' freedom, but then again, there is also this discussion in Indigenous studies and ethical guidelines of Indigenous studies and so on. And I consider this very important, and I think it's something that may be healing the whole academia from this colonial historical load of colonialism. And also in the case of the Sami people, universities and researchers are really carrying a really heavy load of, for instance, race biological research that has been conducted among the Sami and so on. And the Sami people have been researched really a lot. So in our institute, we are constantly talking about these issues and trying to find sustainable ways to develop Sami studies and research conducted among the Sami. And of course, in our case, we have a really good start points for that, because most of our staff are representing Sami people. So yes, I wish these ethical guidelines really welcome, and I think in many cases the whole elements of the academia should be replanned or rebuilt in when it comes to the collaboration between Indigenous communities and the researchers. Of course, for instance, when it comes to the Sami University, we are trying to take the needs of, for instance, the Sami speech communities into account when we are planning research projects, and that's our whole start point. I wouldn't think anyone would start research in our institute that wouldn't have need and importance at local level. And I think that's something more and more common in academic world when these things are better known and taken into consideration.
Thank you, Annika. If there are any more questions, drop them in the Q&A real quick. But if not, thank you again. This was a wonderful talk, really thought-provoking in a lot of ways. I will be turning over many of these points in my head in the coming days. So thank you again. It was wonderful to hear you speak. And if anyone has additional questions for Annika, I think she provided her email, or you can drop them in the conference lobby chat. And I hope everyone will tune back in here in about 6 hours for 2 talks back-to-back by Ilaria Cruz and Christine Sims. Will be hearing about language revitalization in Mexico and in the Acoma Pueblo in the United States. So thank you so much, Annika. A big round of applause invisibly from the audience, but a round of applause from here. And thank you. We will see you all at the next session. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.